Marcus Webb stood outside the sterling table, his own upscale bistro, dressed in worn jeans and a faded jacket that had seen better days. His carefully groomed appearance was gone, replaced by deliberate dishevelment that made him look like any struggling working-class man off the street. As he pushed through the polished brass doors, not a single staff member recognized the man who signed their paychecks each week. What Marcus witnessed in the next hour would shake him to his core. The elegant floor manager took one look at his appearance and made immediate assumptions. Marcus overheard conversations about overcharging certain customers, cutting corners on food quality, and staff openly mocking people they deemed unworthy of dining there. They had no idea the man they were about to humiliate was the one who signed their paychecks. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Marcus Webb had built the sterling table with his own 2 hands, but more importantly, with his own sweat and dreams. 20 years ago, he had been washing dishes in a cramped kitchen downtown, his hands raw from scalding water and harsh detergent, working double shifts just to make rent on a studio apartment he shared with 2 roommates. The head chef back then, an older man named Giuseppe, had seen something in him. Giuseppe taught him that a restaurant was not just about food, it was about dignity. Every person who walked through those doors, whether they wore a tailored suit or paint-stained overalls, deserved to feel valued and respected. That philosophy became the foundation of everything Marcus believed. When he finally opened the sterling table 12 years ago, he made a promise to himself that his establishment would be different. It would be upscale, yes, with fine linens and carefully crafted dishes, but it would never turn anyone away based on how they looked. Success came gradually, then all at once. The sterling table earned recognition, awards, a loyal following. Marcus hired staff carefully, trained them personally, and thought he had built something special. Then the letters started arriving. 3 anonymous notes in 2 months, slipped under his office door or mailed to his home address. They spoke of staff treating customers poorly, of people being turned away or humiliated based on their appearance, of a culture of elitism that contradicted everything he stood for. Marcus wanted to believe his employees would never betray his values, but the specific details in those letters gnawed at him. Catherine, his wife of 15 years and the woman who had supported him through every risk and struggle, sat across from him at their kitchen table when he told her his plan. She reached for his hand, her blue eyes filled with concern. "Marcus, if this is true, it will break your heart," she said softly. "I know," he replied, his jaw set with determination, "but I need to know the truth." She squeezed his hand. "But promise me you'll stay calm, no matter what you find." He promised, though he wondered if he could keep that promise. The next morning, Marcus carefully assembled his disguise, pulling old clothes from the back of his closet, preparing to see his dream through the eyes of someone the world often overlooked. Marcus pulled the worn denim jacket over his shoulders, feeling the frayed cuffs against his wrists. It was a jacket he had kept from his dishwashing days, unable to throw it away despite Catherine's suggestions that it belonged in the donation bin. The fabric still smelled faintly of detergent and old memories. He paired it with a plain gray t-shirt that had faded from too many washes and jeans that had seen better days. With a small tear near the left knee, his shoes were old sneakers, scuffed and dirty, the kind that spoke of hard work and limited means. Looking in the mirror, Marcus barely recognized himself. He ran his hands through his normally neat hair, tousling it deliberately until it looked unkempt and uncared for. He skipped his usual morning shave, leaving the shadow of stubble across his jaw. The transformation was complete. Instead of his sleek black sedan, Marcus climbed into his old pickup truck, the one he kept for hauling supplies and occasional renovation projects. The engine coughed to life with a rattle that made him wince. As he drove through the city toward his restaurant, his heart hammered against his ribs. The lunch rush would be in full swing, the perfect time to observe how his staff operated under pressure, how they treated people when the dining room was packed, and tensions ran high. The sterling table came into view, and despite his anxiety, Marcus felt that familiar swell of pride. The building's facade was elegant without being pretentious, with large windows that allowed natural light to flood the interior. Cream-colored stonework, and a simple brass sign that bore the restaurant's name in refined lettering. Flower boxes overflowed with seasonal blooms, and the outdoor patio was dotted with pristine white umbrellas. This place represented everything he had worked for, every sacrifice, every risk, every dream deferred and finally realized. Marcus parked his truck 2 blocks away, not wanting anyone to recognize the vehicle. As he walked toward the entrance, his palms began to sweat. Other customers streamed past him, most dressed in business casual attire, heading inside for their midday meals. He could see through the windows that the dining room was pleasantly busy, servers moving between tables with practiced efficiency. Marcus stopped just outside the brass-trimmed doors, his hand hovering near the handle. He took a deep, steadying breath, filling his lungs with cool autumn air. Whatever he discovered in the next hour would change everything. He pulled open the door and stepped inside. The moment Marcus stepped through the doors of the Sterling table, he felt the shift in perspective like a physical weight settling onto his shoulders. How strange it was to enter his own establishment as an outsider, to see the space he knew so intimately through completely different eyes. The interior was exactly as he had left it that morning when he had stopped by his office before dawn. Yet everything felt foreign and new. The polished marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting from the crystal chandeliers he had personally selected from an artisan in Vermont. The walls were painted a warm cream color, adorned with understated artwork from local painters he had commissioned. Fresh flowers sat in elegant vases on every table, their fragrance mingling with the rich aromas drifting from the kitchen. White linen tablecloths draped perfectly over each table, and the gentle murmur of conversation filled the air with a sophisticated ambiance. It was beautiful, refined, welcoming. At least, it had always felt welcoming to him. Emily Porter stood at the hostess stand, a young woman of 23 with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun. Marcus had hired her 8 months ago, impressed by her warm smile and genuine enthusiasm. That same smile appeared now as she looked up from the reservation book, her expression open and friendly. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sterling table," she began, her voice bright and professional. Then her eyes traveled down, taking in his appearance, and Marcus watched something shift in her face. The smile remained, but it tightened slightly at the corners. Her eyes, which had been welcoming, now held a flicker of uncertainty. She glanced past him toward the door, as if expecting someone else to follow him inside. Someone who looked more appropriate for the surroundings. Marcus became acutely aware of how his faded jacket and scuffed shoes contrasted with the elegant interior. How out of place he must seem standing on those gleaming floors. Emily's gaze returned to him, and she straightened slightly, her posture becoming more formal, more guarded. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" she asked. And though her tone remained polite, there was a subtle change in it, a slight edge of doubt, as if she was already preparing for the answer she expected. Marcus felt the first sting of what countless others must have experienced. The quiet judgment that came from simply not looking the part. Before Marcus could respond to Emily's question, a figure appeared from the dining room with the confident stride of someone who owned every space he entered. Trevor Blackwood, the floor manager Marcus had hired 2 years ago based on glowing references from a high-end establishment across town. Trevor was 41 years old, impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. His signature red silk tie was knotted with precision, and his dark hair was slicked back with enough product to reflect the chandelier light. A gold watch gleamed at his wrist, the kind of timepiece that made a statement about status and success. Everything about Trevor's appearance screamed refinement and exclusivity. He moved with the self-assurance of a man who believed he was the guardian of good taste, the arbiter of who belonged and who did not. His eyes landed on Marcus, and the assessment was immediate and unmistakable. Those eyes traveled from Marcus's unkempt hair down to his scuffed sneakers and back up again, and with each passing second, Trevor's expression grew more pinched, more disdainful. His lips pressed into a thin line, and one eyebrow arched in a way that conveyed volumes without a single word. "Emily, I'll handle this," Trevor said smoothly, placing a hand on the hostess stand as he positioned himself between her and Marcus. His tone was pleasant enough on the surface, but there was an underlying current of dismissal. He turned to Marcus, and his smile was cool, professional, and utterly devoid of genuine warmth. "Good afternoon," Trevor began, his voice carrying just enough volume that nearby patrons could hear. "Are you sure you're in the right place? There's a very nice diner 2 blocks down on Maple Street that serves excellent sandwiches at reasonable prices." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he kept his expression neutral, his voice steady and calm. This was exactly what the anonymous letters had described, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from reading about it. "I'm in the right place," Marcus replied evenly. "I'd like a table for lunch, please." Trevor's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "I see. Well, the Sterling Table is a fine dining establishment. I'm not sure if you're aware of our price point." Marcus held Trevor's gaze, refusing to be intimidated in his own restaurant. "I'd still like a table for lunch." Trevor did not move toward the dining room to seat Marcus. Instead, he remained planted at the hostess stand, his arms crossing over his chest in a posture that was both defensive and confrontational. "Have you dined with us before?" Trevor asked, his tone taking on the quality of an interrogation rather than a polite inquiry. "I need to ensure you understand what kind of establishment this is." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I haven't dined here before, but I'm familiar with the restaurant." Trevor's expression suggested he doubted that very much. "The Sterling Table isn't your typical lunch spot. Our entrees start at $35, and that's before wine or appetizers. Most guests spend well over $100 for a meal here." His voice carried across the entryway, and Marcus noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Several diners seated near the windows had turned in their chairs, their conversations pausing as they observed the exchange. A woman in a cream-colored blazer whispered something to her lunch companion, both of them glancing toward Marcus with curiosity and perhaps a touch of pity. A businessman seated alone looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed as he watched Trevor's performance. The humiliation settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. This was his restaurant, his dream, and he was being publicly questioned about whether he could afford to eat in it. Every eye that turned toward him felt like a judgment. Every whisper a confirmation that he did not belong. His face grew warm, and his hands clenched slightly at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm, to breathe steadily, to maintain his dignity in the face of this assault. Trevor continued, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "There are other establishments that might be more suitable for your budget. The diner I mentioned has excellent reviews, and there's a family restaurant on 4th Street that's very affordable and casual, much more comfortable for someone in your situation." Marcus met Trevor's gaze directly, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of restrained emotion. "I appreciate your suggestions, but I'm prepared to order and pay for my meal here. I'd like a table, please." The silence that followed felt eternal, the air thick with tension as Trevor's jaw tightened and his eyes flashed with something darker than mere condescension. Trevor's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long moment Marcus thought he might actually refuse to seat him. Then, with a sharp exhale through his nose, Trevor snatched a single menu from beneath the hostess stand. "Follow me," he said curtly, the words clipped and cold. He turned on his heel and strode into the dining room without looking back to see if Marcus followed. Marcus walked behind him, acutely aware of the eyes still tracking his movement through the restaurant. Trevor led him past the prime seating areas, past the large windows where natural light streamed in and illuminated the elegant table settings, past the cozy booths along the far wall that offered both comfort and privacy, past the center tables where the restaurant's energy and ambiance were most alive. Instead, Trevor headed toward the back corner near the kitchen doors, to a small two-top table that Marcus recognized immediately as the worst seat in the house. It was positioned directly in the path of servers rushing in and out of the kitchen, tucked beside the wait station where staff gathered to input orders and grab supplies. The constant traffic and noise made it impossible to enjoy a peaceful meal, and the location was deliberately hidden from the view of other diners, as if whoever sat there should be kept out of sight. Marcus knew this table well because he had specifically instructed his staff never to seat guests there, unless the restaurant was at absolute capacity and every other option had been exhausted. It was meant as overflow seating only, a last resort. Trevor gestured to the chair with a sweep of his hand that somehow managed to convey disdain. "Here you are," he said flatly. Marcus pulled out the chair and sat down, immediately feeling the table wobble beneath his hands. One leg was clearly uneven, something that should have been reported and fixed immediately according to the maintenance standards he had established. The chair itself was positioned so close to the kitchen doors that he could hear the clatter of dishes and the sharp calls of the kitchen staff coordinating orders. Trevor dropped the menu onto the table without ceremony, the leather-bound folder landing with a soft thud. He made no move to offer a wine list, no gesture toward the water glasses stacked nearby at the wait station, no polite explanation of the day's specials or chef's recommendations that he had trained every staff member to provide. Marcus looked up at him, waiting, but Trevor simply straightened his red tie and turned away without another word. Marcus opened the menu and positioned it in front of his face, but his eyes were not reading the familiar descriptions of dishes he had personally approved and refined over the years. Instead, his attention was drawn to the wait station barely 3 feet from his table, where 2 servers had gathered to input orders on the computer terminal. They spoke in low voices, clearly believing they were far enough from the dining room to avoid being overheard. Never imagining that someone sat so close in the shadows of that corner table. The first voice belonged to a server Marcus recognized as David Chen, a young man of 26 who had been with the Sterling table for 18 months. "Table 12 is killing me," David muttered, his fingers tapping at the screen. "They keep asking questions about every single ingredient. I don't have time to deal with this during lunch rush." The second server, a woman named Andrea Marsh, laughed quietly. "At least yours look like they'll tip. I got stuck with a couple at table 7 who showed up in jeans, and I just know they're going to be difficult." Marcus felt his stomach tighten, the casual dismissal in their voices. The judgment based purely on appearance went against every principle he had worked to instill in his staff. But then David said something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Speaking of tips, did you add the extra service charge to that party of 4 yesterday? The ones who paid in cash?" Andrea glanced around before responding, and Marcus tilted the menu slightly to obscure his face while keeping his ears trained on every word. "Of course," she replied. "Trevor showed me the trick. You add it to tables who won't notice or won't complain. Cash customers especially, they never ask for itemized receipts, and if they do, you just apologize and say it was a computer error." David nodded, grinning. "I made an extra 200 last week doing that. Trevor's right. Some people are too timid to question the bill, especially if you act confident about it." Marcus gripped the menu so tightly his knuckles went white. This was not just poor customer service or subtle discrimination. This was theft, systematic and deliberate fraud being committed against his customers. In his restaurant, apparently with Trevor's guidance and approval, everything he had built, every value he had tried to establish, was being corrupted from within. A young waiter emerged from the kitchen doors, nearly bumping into Marcus's table as he passed. Marcus recognized him as James Sullivan, a 24-year-old who had been hired 4 months ago. James carried himself with the energy of someone who believed he was destined for better things than this job, and his expression as he approached Marcus's table confirmed he viewed this particular assignment as beneath him. James stopped at the table's edge, his posture rigid and impatient, his eyes fixed somewhere over Marcus's shoulder rather than making direct contact. He pulled out his order pad with movements that suggested this was a tremendous inconvenience. "What can I get you?" The words came out flat, devoid of the warmth or professionalism that Marcus trained all his servers to display. There was no introduction, no mention of his name, no welcoming smile, just those 4 clipped words hanging in the air like an obligation he resented fulfilling. Marcus looked up from the menu, attempting to catch James's eye. "I have a few questions about the menu, if you don't mind. What would you recommend for someone who enjoys seafood but prefers lighter preparations?" James's jaw tightened visibly. "The salmon is popular," he said, his tone suggesting this answer should suffice and that further questions would be unwelcome. Marcus persisted, keeping his voice polite and measured. "How is the salmon prepared today? Is it grilled or pan-seared?" A heavy sigh escaped James's lips. Loud enough that Marcus heard it clearly, loud enough to be deliberately audible. "Pan-seared," James answered, his eyes now drifting toward other tables in the dining room, as if desperately seeking rescue from this conversation. "Could I please have some water while I decide?" Marcus asked. Another sigh, this one accompanied by an eye roll that James barely bothered to conceal. "Sure," James muttered, turning away without another word and walking toward a nearby table where a couple in expensive business attire had just been seated. Marcus watched, stunned, as James's entire demeanor transformed. The young man's face brightened into a genuine smile, his shoulders relaxed, and his voice took on a warm, engaging quality as he greeted them. "Good afternoon, and welcome to the Sterling Table. My name is James, and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with something to drink? We have an excellent wine selection, and our sommelier is available if you'd like recommendations." The contrast was devastating and unmistakable. James disappeared into the kitchen to fetch water, and the swinging doors remained ajar for a moment, propped open by a bus tub someone had wedged against the frame. Through that opening, Marcus could hear voices from the kitchen, the usual organized chaos of a lunch rush. But then certain phrases began to cut through the general noise, each one landing like a punch to his gut. "Chef, we're running low on the fresh halibut." A voice called out, one Marcus recognized as his sous chef, Robert. "Use the batch from last Thursday," came the reply from someone Marcus did not immediately recognize. "Just doctor it up with extra lemon and herbs. No one will know the difference." Last Thursday, Marcus did mental calculations. That would make the fish 9 days old. His stomach churned. The health department guidelines he had implemented, the strict rotation system he had established, the commitment to freshness that had earned the Sterling Table its reputation, all of it was being ignored. Then another voice chimed in, this one belonging to a line cook. "What about table 18? They ordered the filet mignon. "Which table is that?" The couple Trevor seated in the back. "You know, the ones who don't look like they eat here often." There was a pause, then a laugh that made Marcus feel physically ill. "Give them the select grade instead of prime. Same price on the bill, but we save money on the cut. Trevor's been having us do it for weeks now. He says certain customers don't have refined enough palates to tell the difference anyway." Marcus pressed his hand against his abdomen, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. This was not just poor service or even simple theft. This was systematic fraud, health code violations, and a complete betrayal of everything he had worked to build. He had built the Sterling Table on the principle that every customer deserved the absolute best, regardless of who they were or how they looked. The idea that his staff was deliberately serving inferior or potentially unsafe food to customers they deemed unworthy was beyond comprehension. His vision of a place built on integrity and respect had been corrupted into something unrecognizable. Something that not only violated his values but potentially endangered people's health. The anonymous letters had been right, but the reality was far worse than he had imagined. James returned with a glass of water, setting it down on Marcus's wobbling table with enough force that some sloshed over the rim. He walked away without a word, and Marcus was left staring at the water glass, his mind reeling from everything he had heard. Then Trevor's voice cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, and Marcus's entire body went rigid. The floor manager had positioned himself at the wait station, his back partially to Marcus's table, speaking to Andrea in a tone that was both instructional and boastful. "You handled table 9 perfectly," Trevor said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence Marcus had once mistaken for professionalism. "That's exactly how we maintain standards here. The Sterling Table is for a certain class of people, Andrea. We have a reputation to uphold, and that means we need to weed out those who don't belong." Andrea nodded, and Marcus could see her taking mental notes as Trevor continued. "I've been doing this for years, at this restaurant and others. You make them uncomfortable from the moment they walk in, question whether they have reservations, suggest other establishments, seat them poorly if they insist on staying. Most people get the message and leave. The ones who stay usually don't come back after experiencing subpar service. Trevor straightened his red tie, a gesture Marcus now recognized as a physical manifestation of his superiority complex. I've done this dozens of times, probably hundreds if I count my entire career. It's about protecting the establishment's reputation and ensuring our regular clientele. The ones who truly appreciate fine dining and can afford it have the experience they expect. We can't have just anyone walking in off the street thinking they belong here. Marcus's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he felt heat rising up his neck into his face. Every fiber of his being wanted to stand up, to reveal himself, to confront Trevor immediately and throw him out of the restaurant. But Catherine's words echoed in his mind. Her plea for him to stay calm, to gather all the information he needed. He forced himself to remain seated, to breathe slowly through his nose, to maintain the facade of the humble customer studying his menu. But inside, rage burned like a wildfire, consuming every ounce of patience he possessed. Marcus was still struggling to control the anger coursing through his veins when a young woman appeared at his table carrying a basket of fresh bread. She was petite, with kind brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old, had been working at the Sterling table for only 6 weeks, still in her probationary period. Marcus had interviewed her personally and been impressed by her genuine warmth and her stories about working her way through community college. She set the bread basket down gently, along with a small plate of herb butter, and offered Marcus a smile that reached her eyes. "I'm so sorry for the wait, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying genuine concern. "I noticed you've been sitting here for a while without service. I know James is your server, but I wanted to make sure you had bread and water at least." She glanced at his nearly empty water glass and frowned. "Let me refill that for you." Sarah disappeared briefly and returned with a full pitcher, topping off his glass with care. As she did, Marcus noticed her eyes flicker toward the wait station where Trevor stood, and something uncomfortable crossed her face. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I apologize if your experience hasn't been what you expected. That's not what this restaurant is supposed to be about." The words struck Marcus deeply. Here was someone who understood, who had seen the same things he was witnessing, and was troubled by them. Sarah straightened and spoke in a normal tone again. "Please take your time with the menu. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to help, even though I'm not your assigned server." Her kindness was like a beam of light cutting through the darkness of everything else he had experienced. She treated him with the same dignity and respect she would afford any guest, seeing him as a person worthy of care rather than someone to be judged and dismissed. As Sarah walked away to attend to her own tables, Marcus watched her interact with an elderly couple, her manner warm and attentive. She was exactly the kind of employee he had envisioned when he opened the Sterling table. Someone who understood that hospitality was about making every person feel valued. He made a mental note of her name, of her genuine compassion, knowing that whatever happened next, Sarah Mitchell represented the hope that his vision was not entirely lost. James eventually returned to take Marcus's order, his impatience practically radiating from his posture. Marcus looked up from the menu and spoke clearly. "I'll have the prime filet mignon, prepared medium rare, with the truffle butter." It was one of the most expensive items on the menu, a dish Marcus had personally developed with his head chef, using only the highest quality beef from an exclusive supplier they had cultivated a relationship with over years. James's eyebrows shot up, and he scribbled the order with obvious skepticism before disappearing toward the kitchen. Marcus thought that would be the end of it. But within moments Trevor appeared at his table, the menu in his hand, open to the page featuring the steaks. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of concern that barely concealed his condescension. "Excuse me, sir," Trevor began, his voice loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables. "I wanted to confirm your order with you. You selected the prime filet mignon?" Marcus nodded calmly. "Yes, that's correct." Trevor's finger tapped on the menu where the price was listed. "I just want to make sure you saw the price. It's $68 for the entree alone. That doesn't include sides, which are an additional $12 each, or any appetizers or beverages." The words hung in the air like an accusation, Marcus felt the eyes of nearby diners turning toward them once again. A businessman in a charcoal suit stopped cutting his chicken and watched with barely concealed discomfort. The couple James had been so attentive to earlier exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Trevor continued, his tone dripping with false helpfulness. We have other options that might be more economical. The chicken breast is excellent and quite reasonable at $28. Or perhaps a pasta dish might be more suitable for your budget? Marcus met Trevor's gaze steadily, refusing to look away, refusing to be cowed by this public interrogation. His voice remained calm and measured, though every word required tremendous self-control. I appreciate your concern, but I'd like to proceed with my original order. The prime filet mignon, medium rare, with truffle butter. Trevor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a brief moment his professional mask slipped, and Marcus saw naked irritation flash across his features. Then the smile returned. But it was colder now, sharper, carrying an edge of contempt. As you wish, Trevor said, snapping the menu closed. As he turned to walk away, Marcus caught the sneering smile that crossed Trevor's face. A smile that said he had done his duty in warning someone clearly out of their depth, and whatever happened next was Marcus's own fault. While Marcus waited for his meal, his position near the wait station afforded him a clear view of the payment terminal where Trevor had stationed himself. The floor manager appeared to be personally overseeing several transactions, his fingers moving across the touchscreen with practiced efficiency. Marcus watched as an older couple approached to settle their bill, thanking Trevor for a lovely meal. Trevor's smile was gracious as he processed their credit card, but Marcus noticed his fingers tapping additional buttons on the screen before presenting the receipt for signature. The couple signed without examining the itemized charges, too polite or trusting to question what appeared on the slip. As soon as they departed, Andrea approached Trevor with a question about another table's bill. "What about table 14?" she asked quietly. "They're paying cash and seem a bit confused about the pricing." Trevor glanced toward the table in question, and Marcus followed his gaze to see a middle-aged couple in casual clothing, the kind of customers who clearly made Trevor uncomfortable. "Perfect," Trevor said, his voice low but audible to Marcus's position just feet away. "Add the automatic gratuity at 25% instead of the standard 18%. Also include the special service fee. If they question it, tell them it's policy for parties during peak hours." Andrea hesitated. "But there are only 2 of them. That's not really a party." Trevor fixed her with a pointed stare. "Andrea, I've been doing this for 2 years here. It's a foolproof system. Certain customers won't question the charges because they don't want to appear cheap or cause a scene. The ones who might complain have already been discouraged from dining here in the first place. Mr. Webb is far too busy with his other ventures to scrutinize every bill, and our numbers look excellent because of these adjustments." Marcus felt as though ice water had been poured down his spine. His other ventures. Trevor spoke about him as if he were some absent, disinterested owner who had abandoned his restaurant to pursue other interests. The truth was, Marcus had intentionally hired strong managers because he trusted them to uphold his values while he focused on ensuring quality and vision. That trust had been weaponized against him. This was not just a few dishonest employees skimming tips. This was systematic, organized fraud happening daily under Trevor's direction. Every fraudulent charge damaged his restaurant's integrity. Every manipulated bill was a betrayal of customer trust. Every scheme eroded the reputation he had spent over a decade building. His life's work was being destroyed from within by the very person he had entrusted to protect it. Marcus had been sitting at his table for 45 minutes when his food finally arrived. He had watched at least 6 tables that had been seated after him receive their meals, seen servers delivering beautifully plated dishes with flourishes and descriptions of the preparations. Each time the kitchen doors swung open, he had looked up with expectation, only to see James walk past him to attend to other tables. When his plate finally came, James approached with the same reluctant energy he had displayed throughout, carrying the dish without ceremony or care. He set it down on the wobbling table with enough force that the silverware rattled, the motion more of a toss than a proper placement. There was no presentation, No description of the dish. No "Enjoy your meal" or inquiry about whether Marcus needed anything else. James simply turned and walked away, leaving Marcus staring down at his food in shocked disbelief. The filet mignon sat on the plate in a manner that could only be described as haphazard. Marcus knew exactly how this dish was supposed to be presented because he had designed the plating himself. The steak should have been centered on a warm plate, surrounded by a delicate arrangement of roasted vegetables, with a truffle butter melting artfully over the top and a drizzle of reduced balsamic forming an elegant design around the perimeter. Instead, the steak had been placed off-center. The vegetables looked as though they had been dumped rather than arranged, and the truffle butter sat in an ungainly lump on top rather than being carefully portioned. More concerning was the size of the portion. Marcus had specified that the fillet should be a full 8 ounces, a generous cut that justified the premium price. The piece of meat on his plate looked closer to 6 ounces, noticeably smaller than what should have been served. He picked up his knife and fork, cutting into the steak. The meat was cooked to a perfect medium rare, the interior a beautiful rosy pink, and when he tasted it, the quality of the beef and the kitchen's skill were undeniable. His kitchen staff were talented, trained professionals who took pride in their craft. But it was clear that someone had instructed them to give this particular dish less attention, less care, and quite literally, less food. The deliberate sabotage was unmistakable, and it filled Marcus with a profound sadness that went beyond anger. Marcus was halfway through his meal, each bite tasting like ash in his mouth despite the quality of the preparation, when Trevor's voice cut through the ambient noise again. The floor manager had returned to the wait station, this time accompanied by David, the server Marcus had overheard earlier discussing bill inflation. They stood close together, their voices low and conspiratorial. But Marcus's proximity made every word painfully clear. "Did you submit the inventory report for this week?" Trevor asked, his tone casual, almost bored. David nodded, pulling out his phone to show Trevor something on the screen. "Yeah, I reported losses on the prime beef, the lobster tails, and about 6 bottles from the reserve wine collection. Same as you told me." Trevor's smile was visible even from Marcus's angle. "Perfect. That should cover what we moved last weekend. The owner is so hands-off he'll never notice the discrepancies." Marcus Webb built this place and then essentially abandoned it to pursue his other interests. He stops by the office occasionally but never audits the actual inventory. It's almost too easy. Marcus's fork froze halfway to his mouth, his entire body going rigid as the words registered. David laughed quietly, shaking his head with something that resembled admiration. "I can't believe how trusting he is. My buddy who works at Meridian says their owner watches everything like a hawk. We're lucky Webb is so naive." Trevor leaned against the wait station, his posture relaxed and confident. "Trust is a liability in this business. I learned that years ago. Webb thinks if he hires good people and treats them well, they'll naturally uphold his precious values. It's almost charming how idealistic he is. Meanwhile, I've been supplementing my income quite nicely for the past year and a half. The inventory system he set up is actually helpful because it makes the false reports look legitimate. The casual cruelty of it, the way they spoke about him as though he were a fool, some naive child playing at running a restaurant, cut deeper than anything else Marcus had experienced that day. This was not just poor service or discrimination or even fraud against customers. This was direct theft from him personally. Systematic embezzlement happening under his nose while his manager mocked him for the very trust and decency that had built the sterling table in the first place. Marcus set down his silverware carefully, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. He knew he had to act, that he could not let this continue for even one more day. But Catherine's voice still echoed in his mind, urging patience. He would wait for the right moment, gather every piece of evidence, and then he would end this nightmare completely. Marcus pushed his plate away, the meal only half finished, his appetite destroyed by everything he had witnessed and overheard. He caught James's attention and made the universal gesture for the check. James nodded curtly and disappeared, returning a few minutes later with a black leather folder that he placed on the table without a word. Marcus opened it and felt his pulse quicken as he scanned the itemized charges. The filet mignon was listed at $68 as expected, but beneath it were charges that made no sense. An appetizer he had never ordered, listed as lobster bisque for $18, a dessert, crème brûlée, for $14, despite the fact that he had not even finished his entree yet. A glass of wine he had never received for $22, and at the bottom, a line item that read, special service fee for $35 with no explanation. The total came to $173 before tax and gratuity. Marcus took a slow breath and looked up as James passed by. "Excuse me, there seem to be some errors on this bill. I didn't order an appetizer, wine, or dessert." James barely glanced at the folder. "That's what the system shows," he said with a shrug, already turning to leave. Marcus kept his voice level. "Could you please check with your manager? These charges are incorrect." James exhaled heavily, radiating annoyance, but he walked toward the wait station where Trevor stood. Marcus watched them confer, saw Trevor's eyes narrow as he looked toward the corner table, and then the floor manager approached with measured steps and that familiar condescending smile. Trevor picked up the bill and made a show of examining it. "I see no errors here, sir. All charges are accurate according to our system." Marcus pointed to each incorrect item. "I never ordered or received any of these items. And this service fee is not explained anywhere on your menu." Trevor's smile hardened into something colder. "The service fee is standard policy for all guests during peak dining hours. As for the other items, perhaps you don't recall ordering them." The implication that Marcus was either lying or too confused to remember his own order hung between them like poison. Marcus felt heat rising in his face but maintained his composure. "I'm certain I did not order these items. I'd like them removed from the bill." Trevor straightened his red tie, that telltale gesture of superiority. "Sir, if you can't afford to dine at an establishment like this, perhaps you should have heeded my advice earlier about the diner down the street. We don't appreciate customers who try to dispute legitimate charges." The tension hung in the air like a blade about to fall, and then the brass doors of the Sterling table opened. Catherine Webb stepped inside, elegant in a tailored charcoal suit and silk blouse, her blonde hair swept up in a sophisticated twist. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in refined spaces, her presence commanding immediate attention from the hostess stand. Emily greeted her warmly, clearly recognizing quality when she saw it. But Catherine's eyes were already scanning the dining room. When her gaze landed on the corner table near the kitchen doors, her face lit up with recognition and warmth. "Marcus!" she called out, her voice carrying across the restaurant with affection. She walked directly toward him, her heels clicking on the marble floor, a smile spreading across her face. "Darling, I'm so sorry I'm late. Have you been waiting long?" The effect was instantaneous. Trevor's head whipped around, his expression shifting from condescension to confusion. James froze mid-step, his eyes darting between Catherine and the man he had been dismissing all afternoon. Emily at the hostess stand looked bewildered, and conversations at nearby tables faltered as diners sensed something significant was happening. Marcus stood slowly, setting the fraudulent bill down on the table with deliberate care. He met Catherine's eyes and saw the question there. The concern, the support. He nodded slightly, and she understood. The time had come. "Hello, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet restaurant. He turned to face Trevor, whose confusion was rapidly morphing into something that looked like dawning horror. "I believe it's time I properly introduce myself." Marcus's posture changed, his shoulders straightening, the humble demeanor dropping away like a shed skin. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm the owner of the Sterling table." The words landed like thunder. Trevor's face drained of all color, the blood rushing from his cheeks so quickly he swayed slightly on his feet. His mouth opened and closed without sound, his carefully constructed composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. James stood frozen by a nearby table, his order pad slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. The entire dining room had gone silent. Every conversation stopped, every fork lowered. Staff members who had been moving between tables stood motionless, shock rippling through them like a wave. Andrea's hand flew to her mouth. David's eyes went wide with panic. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to fade as word spread through the open doors. Marcus let the silence stretch, let the weight of the revelation settle over everyone, before he spoke again. Marcus's voice remained calm, but it carried the weight of authority and deep disappointment as he addressed not just Trevor but the entire restaurant. For the past hour, I've been sitting in this corner, in the worst seat in my own establishment, experiencing firsthand what happens when my values are abandoned. He gestured to the fraudulent bill, still lying on the table. This bill contains 4 items I never ordered, totaling over $70 in false charges. James, you can confirm I ordered only the filet mignon and water. James's face had gone pale, and he managed only a jerky nod. Marcus continued, his gaze moving to Trevor, whose hands were trembling at his sides. I overheard conversations about deliberately inflating bills for customers who wouldn't notice or complain. I heard staff discussing using expired fish from 9 days ago. I heard instructions to substitute select-grade beef for prime cuts on customers deemed unworthy of quality food. And most damning of all, I heard you, Trevor, discussing false inventory reports to cover theft, mocking me for being too trusting to notice. Trevor's mouth worked soundlessly before words finally came, his voice higher than normal, desperate. That's not, you're misunderstanding the context. These are standard practices in upscale dining, quality control measures. Marcus pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and held it up. I've been recording audio for the past 45 minutes. Every conversation, every admission, every instance of fraud and discrimination is documented. The color that had drained from Trevor's face did not return. Instead, his expression crumbled entirely, the smooth, professional veneer cracking like shattered glass. His eyes darted around the room as if seeking escape, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. Mr. Webb, please, I can explain. There are circumstances. Marcus shook his head. You told multiple customers, including me, that this restaurant is for a certain class of people. You've been systematically driving away anyone who doesn't meet your superficial standards of appearance and wealth. That is the exact opposite of everything I built this place to represent. He paused, then his expression softened slightly as he looked toward Sarah, who stood near the window tables with tears in her eyes. Sarah Mitchell, however, showed me genuine kindness and hospitality today. She apologized for poor service that wasn't her responsibility. She treated me with dignity and respect. She represents what the Sterling table should be. Catherine moved to stand beside Marcus, her hand finding his. Trevor's professional mask had completely dissolved now, replaced by naked fear and desperation. Please, Mr. Webb. I have a family. I need this job. Marcus gently squeezed Catherine's hand before stepping forward, his voice firm but not cruel as he addressed the assembled staff who had gathered from all corners of the restaurant. Everyone, please listen carefully. What I witnessed today represents a fundamental betrayal of everything the Sterling table stands for. I built this restaurant on the principle that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect and dignity, regardless of how they look or how much money they appear to have. That principle is not negotiable. He turned to Trevor, whose face was now streaked with perspiration. Trevor Blackwood, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You will collect your personal belongings from your locker and leave the premises. Andrea Marsh and David Chen, you are also terminated for your participation in systematic fraud against our customers. James Sullivan, you are suspended without pay pending a full investigation into your conduct. The 3 named staff members stood frozen, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them. Marcus continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent dining room. Effective today, we will be implementing several new policies. First, a mystery shopper program will regularly evaluate how staff treat all customers, with particular attention to whether anyone is being judged or discriminated against based on appearance. Second, every staff member will undergo mandatory retraining on our core values and what true hospitality means. Third, I am establishing an open-door policy. Any employee who witnesses behavior that contradicts our values can come directly to me or Catherine without fear of retaliation. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, some ashamed, some relieved, and some uncertain. I also want to make something absolutely clear. The Sterling table is for everyone. A person in work clothes deserves the same excellent service as someone in an expensive suit. A family saving up for a special meal deserves the same quality food as our wealthiest regular customer. If you cannot treat every human being with equal respect and dignity, then you do not belong on my staff. Marcus's expression softened as he looked toward Sarah, who wiped tears from her cheeks. Sarah Mitchell, I'm promoting you to dining room supervisor effective immediately, with a significant raise. You demonstrated today what real hospitality looks like, and I want you to help me rebuild the culture here to reflect those values. Around the dining room, heads nodded, and Marcus saw relief and determination in the faces of staff members who had been uncomfortable with Trevor's regime but felt powerless to challenge it. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, and the Sterling table had been transformed in ways both visible and invisible. Marcus stood in the dining room one evening, watching Sarah Mitchell guide a new server through proper table service with patience and genuine warmth. She had grown into her leadership role beautifully, implementing training programs that emphasized seeing the humanity in every customer, regardless of appearance or background. The staff had undergone extensive diversity and sensitivity training, and Marcus had restructured the management hierarchy to include multiple oversight layers and regular anonymous feedback systems. The Mystery Shopper program revealed consistent excellence across all customer interactions. And the restaurant's reputation had not only survived the upheaval, but had grown stronger, with reviews praising the authentic warmth and inclusivity of the service. Marcus had also received an unexpected email 3 months after that devastating day. Trevor Blackwood had reached out with a lengthy apology, taking full responsibility for his actions without excuses or justifications. He explained that losing everything, his job, his reputation, his sense of superiority, had forced him to confront the ugliness he had harbored for years. Trevor had enrolled in hospitality ethics courses at the community college and was working as a server at a family diner across town. Learning humility, one table at a time, he asked for nothing from Marcus except perhaps forgiveness someday. Acknowledging he needed to earn redemption through changed behavior, rather than words, Marcus had responded briefly, thanking him for the apology and wishing him well on his journey, recognizing that true change required genuine transformation, not just regret over consequences. Now, as Marcus watched his restaurant thrive under principles of dignity and respect, he reflected deeply on the lessons that day had taught him. Trust was essential in building a team, but it could never replace active oversight and engagement. Systems needed regular evaluation because even the best intentions could be corrupted without vigilance. Core values were not self-sustaining. They required constant protection, reinforcement, and modeling from leadership. He had learned that being hands-on did not mean micromanaging. It meant staying connected to the reality of daily operations, listening to those on the front lines, and never assuming everything was fine simply because it appeared successful from a distance. Marcus turned to address you now, friend, because this story holds lessons for all of us. Never judge another human being by their appearance, their clothing, or your assumptions about their worth. True character reveals itself in how we treat those who can do nothing for us, those who appear powerless or different. If you are in a position of leadership, remember that your values will only survive if you actively protect and reinforce them. Stay connected to the ground-level reality of your organization. Listen to the quiet voices of those who witness injustice but fear speaking up. And if you have experienced discrimination or mistreatment in any establishment, know that your voice matters, your dignity matters, and speaking up can create change. The Sterling table became stronger not despite that difficult day, but because of it. Share this story to remind others that appearances deceive, that everyone deserves respect, and that true success is measured not in profits, but in how we treat the most vulnerable among us.